For decades, conspiracy theorists have insisted that the Apollo 11 moon landing was staged on a soundstage, a government hoax filmed under studio lights. But what they don't know is this: NASA did fake a moon mission. Not Apollo 11, but another mission, one that was entirely simulated, hidden, and intentionally deceptive. This is the real story of how and why NASA created a fake moon mission. And unlike the theories, this one is backed by actual documents. The year is 1967. The space race is in full swing. America is losing. The Soviets have achieved one milestone after another. The first satellite, the first man in space, the first spacewalk. President John F. Kennedy's bold promise to land a man on the moon before the decade ends is on the verge of collapse. NASA is under enormous pressure to deliver not just a working spacecraft, but a working narrative. Enter Project Horizon and Operation Moonblink. These were real classified proposals in the early 60s, including concepts for faking lunar reconnaissance to mislead Soviet intelligence. But the most fascinating and verifiable act of deception came in the form of what historians now call the Phantom Apollo missions. Specifically, Apollo 0. Yes, you heard that right. Before Apollo 1, the mission that tragically ended in a fire during a launch rehearsal, NASA ran a full-scale test mission to simulate a lunar landing. It was unmanned. It had no intention of reaching the moon, but it was presented publicly as part of the actual Apollo sequence. Why? To keep morale up, to make it seem as though progress was moving faster than it actually was. In internal documents, this was referred to as a confidence operation. NASA knew that the Soviet Union had agents watching every press release, every image, every mission patch. So they staged a series of test flights with the external trappings of full Apollo missions. The public saw countdowns. They saw capsule rollouts. They heard press briefings filled with vague language like lunar qualification procedures. But there was no moon goal, no moon rocket, just delay and misdirection. And then came the ultimate act of misdirection, the use of simulated footage. In preparation for Apollo missions, NASA had to train astronauts for how to move, react, and perform in low gravity. To do that, they built massive sets, lunar surfaces, crater fields, lighting rigs. They filmed hours of training footage using slow motion and wire suspension techniques to simulate moon conditions. Some of this footage, when released in the 1970s, became the very material conspiracy theorists would later point to as proof of fakery. But here's the twist. That footage was staged because it had to be. In fact, Stanley Kubrick himself was reportedly consulted during pre-Apollo visualization projects. NASA's art department and Kubrick's special effects team shared materials, not to fake the moon landing, but to help depict it before it happened. NASA needed to sell the mission to Congress, to the public, and to the world. A polished visual narrative was just as important as telemetry data. Kubrick's film 2001: A Space Odyssey, released in 1968, further blurred the lines between cinematic storytelling and technological reality. At the time, audiences marveled at how realistic the moon sequences looked. More realistic, some would later claim, than actual footage from Apollo. But that wasn't evidence of deception. It was evidence of how deeply public imagination had been shaped by speculative fiction and Cold War propaganda. Now, none of this disproves the real moon landing. Apollo 11 happened. We have retroreflectors on the surface, samples that have been studied for decades, and photographic evidence from multiple independent sources. But what it does prove is this: NASA understood the power of illusion. And during the Cold War, illusion was sometimes necessary. In 1968, just months before Apollo 11, NASA staged a completely fake lunar landing as a rehearsal. This wasn't a deception meant to fool the public. It was a live simulation for internal use. It involved the full crew, full mission control, countdowns, and even mock telemetry. In fact, they practiced the press interviews too, rehearsing what they'd say if something went wrong. One NASA administrator at the time called it a simulation so convincing it scared me. And maybe it should, because it reminds us how blurred the line between simulation and reality can become, especially when the stakes are national identity, political dominance, and space supremacy. What's most fascinating is how all of this fed the moon landing hoax movement. When grainy footage of these training simulations leaked or were misinterpreted, conspiracy theorists latched on. They weren't wrong that some footage was faked. They were just wrong about which footage. There's also the element of psychological operations. Some declassified CIA documents indicate that both the United States and the USSR used disinformation campaigns to keep each other guessing. In one case, fake telemetry was transmitted during a rocket test to confuse Soviet radar analysts. In another, a launch manifest was intentionally altered before being leaked. NASA also knew that the American public needed something to believe in. After the trauma of the Kennedy assassination and the brutality of the Vietnam War, the idea of a peaceful, triumphant moon landing served as a unifying mythos, a national redemption arc. The simulations were not lies. They were rehearsals for a shared dream, but the line between dream and reality is thin. By the late 1970s, after Apollo had ended, NASA quietly stopped using public simulations. They had served their purpose. The agency had proven its capabilities and won the PR war. But those old tapes, the ones from the early days, showing astronauts bouncing in mock lunar dust, practicing flag planting, and simulating liftoff, would live on, repurposed by skeptics into something they were never meant to be. So maybe the real hoax isn't that we went to the moon. The real hoax is how many missions were staged just to get us there. From Apollo 0 to fake press kits, from simulated gravity training to internal deception campaigns, this is the part of space history we're never taught. Not because it disproves the moon landing, but because it makes it more complicated. And that's exactly what history should be. Complicated, layered, and sometimes uncomfortable. The truth about NASA's faked mission isn't that they tried to lie. It's that they tried to manage perception in a world where perception meant everything. Space history is full of myths, but the most powerful stories are the ones that blend fact and illusion so well, we forget where one ends and the other begins. And sometimes, the most unbelievable parts are the ones that are true. So next time someone tells you the moon landing was fake, ask them which one, because yes, one of them was. Just not the one they think.